Story 1. The Whisper Behind the Walls. Asterisk. It started the summer I moved into the little rental house on the edge of town, just outside Amarillo. It wasn't much to look at. A squat one-story with paint the color of dried bone and windows clouded with dust that no amount of scrubbing seemed to clear. The landlord had warned me the place was old, built in the 50s, and that the walls settled at night, which was his way of telling me not to get spooked by creaks and groans. But he hadn't mentioned voices. Asterisk. The first night I heard them, I was still living out of boxes. It was past midnight. Too late for cars to be passing on the highway. The crickets had gone quiet, leaving the kind of silence that presses on your ears. And that's when I heard Ita murmur, low and breathy, coming from the wall behind my bed. At first I thought it was the neighbors, but I didn't have neighbors, not for at least half a mile. Asterisk. I lay there listening, heart thudding in my throat. The voice wasn't clear, like words spoken underwater, but there was intent behind it, a rhythm. Someone was whispering right there in the wall, just inches from my head. I pressed my ear to the plaster. Cold air seeped through cracks, and the whisper grew sharper, a woman's voice rasping. Don't let him in. Asterisk. I jerked back, switched on the lamp, and stared at the wall like a fool, expecting it to move. The whisper stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse, like the house had been holding its breath. Asterisk. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning I convinced myself it had been exhaustion, an overactive imagination, maybe the wind crawling through the insulation. But then it happened again, and again. Asterisk. Every night, somewhere between midnight and 3, the voices returned. Sometimes it was the woman, sometimes it was a man, his tone low and angry, like he was scolding me in a language I couldn't understand. Other nights it was a chorus, multiple voices, overlapping, muttering in frantic whispers that seemed to bleed from every wall of the house at once. Asterisk. I tried recording them once, leaving my phone on while I pretended to sleep. When I played it back in the morning, all I heard was static. But underneath, if I turned the volume all the way up, there was a faint hiss that almost sounded like my name. Asterisk. The nights stretched on, and sleep became impossible. My eyes burned, my head throbbed, and the house seemed to grow darker by the day. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Doors I swore I'd shut would be standing open. I started catching movement in the corners, the flick of someone ducking just out of sight. Asterisk. The worst was the night I woke up to the sound of breathing in my room. Not mine, deep, steady breaths just beside the bed. I kept my eyes shut, rigid with terror. As the air grew colder and the voices pressed closer, whispering right into my ear, I could almost feel the wet heat of lips against my skin. He's coming, the woman hissed, her voice clear as day this time. He's coming tonight. Asterisk. I bolted upright, slammed the lights on and searched every inch of the house. Empty, always empty. But I didn't sleep again. Asterisk. The final night came in late August. The air was thick and heavy, thunderheads boiling on the horizon. I sat at the kitchen table nursing black coffee, refusing to go to bed, when the voices started earlier than usual. Not whispers this time. The whole house vibrated with them, dozens of voices screaming at once. Some begged, some cursed, some laughed in jagged, broken tones that turned my stomach. Asterisk. I stumbled back toward the front door, but it slammed shut on its own, the deadbolt twisting into place. The lights flickered, then died, drowning the house in pitch black. And that's when I heard footsteps. Heavy ones, not in the walls this time, but in the hallway, dragging slowly toward me. Asterisk. My chest locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the thing in the hall drew closer. The voices hushed all at once, leaving only the sound of those dragging steps. And then, in the dark, a man's voice spoke from just a foot away. Asterisk. You let me in. Asterisk. I don't remember unlocking the door. I don't remember running barefoot across the gravel drive. The neighbors found me half a mile down the road, hysterical, babbling about voices in the walls. When they went back to check the house, they found the front door wide open. No one inside. Asterisk. I never went back. The landlord still rents the place out. I hear people don't stay long. Story 2. The Children by the Lake. The house had been empty for nearly 20 years before I moved in. It stood on the edge of a dried-up lake in East Texas. The kind of place you wouldn't even notice from the highway unless you were looking for it. The land had once belonged to a family named Hargrove, though no one in town seemed eager to talk about them. When I signed the lease, the realtor only said it was an old farmhouse with a lot of character and then laughed nervously, like she'd just told me a joke I wouldn't get until later. Asterisk. The drive out there was long and lonely, through a stretch of pine woods and farmland that felt abandoned even in daylight. The dirt road that led to the house was barely more than 2 ruts in the earth, lined with barbed wire fences sagging under decades of rust. And then the trees opened, and I saw the house. Asterisk. It was 2 stories, clapboard siding gone gray with weather, windows staring blankly over what used to be Lake Millstone. The lake had dried up years ago, nothing left but a cracked basin stretching out like a wasteland. In the distance, you could see the bones of old piers and half-buried stumps, ghostly reminders of where water used to be. The silence there was thick. No birdsong, no crickets. just the wind sweeping across the empty lake bed. I told myself I was ready for the isolation. After all, that's why I'd moved looking for peace, for distance from the mess of my life back in Dallas. But the first night in that house, I understood what kind of silence I'd brought myself into. It was around 1 in the morning when I woke up. The moonlight slipped through thin curtains, pale and sickly, and the house creaked in the stillness. At first I thought the sound had been part of a dream, a laugh high-pitched quick like a child trying to hold it in. I lay there, frozen under the thin blanket, ears straining, and then I heard it again. A giggle. Out by the lake. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. No children lived anywhere near. The nearest farm was miles down the road. I tried to explain it away, an animal, maybe coyotes making strange noises, but the laugh came once more, clearer now, joined by another, softer voice, a child whispering, though I couldn't make out the words. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat in the living room with the lights on until dawn, staring out the window at the lake bed, empty, just cracked earth and stunted weeds. The next night, it happened again. I heard them closer this time, voices drifting in through the open window like a breeze, children whispering and laughing in the dark. Sometimes it was 1, sometimes 2 or 3, always after midnight, always when the rest of the world seemed dead. I walked outside once, flashlight in hand, determined to prove it was just my imagination. The beam cut across the yard, sweeping over broken fences and the withered field leading to the lake. Nothing moved, but just as I turned back toward the porch, the giggle came again from behind me. Out by the lake bed. The light swung and caught nothing but dust and emptiness. The sound of small feet pattering across dry earth echoed faintly, then faded. I started locking the windows at night, but it didn't help. The voices came through anyway, muffled, close to the walls. Sometimes they seemed to crawl inside the house itself, whispering from corners of the room, brushing against my ear as I tried to sleep. By the end of the first week, I wasn't sleeping much at all. I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring into the dark, waiting for them to start. My nerves were frayed, every creak of the old house making me jump. I stopped going into town because people stared at me like they knew something I didn't, like the Hargrove place had a reputation they'd decided not to share. And then the dreams started. In them, I was standing in the empty lake bed. The cracked ground stretched forever, and shadows darted just at the edge of my vision. Children's voices surrounded me, chanting words I couldn't understand. When I awoke, my throat was raw, as if I'd been whispering along with them all night. One morning, I found small footprints in the dust outside my bedroom window. Bare feet, tiny, too small for any grown person, too clear to be animal tracks. They circled the house in uneven patterns, stopping here and there, like children playing a game in the dark. I tried to leave, packed my truck and drove toward the highway, but halfway down that dirt road, I saw them, figures in the trees, small, pale, watching me from the shadows between pines. When I blinked, they were gone. But my hands shook so badly on the wheel I nearly ran off the road. That night, the voices didn't wait until midnight. They started as soon as the sun went down. Louder now, clearer, they called my name.
Story 3. The Voices by the River. Last winter, in a small Texas town called Llano, tucked between dead mesquite trees and flat plains that stretched like a frozen ocean, the nights had a weight to them, the kind of silence that pressed into your ears until it became sound in itself. The few people who still lived in the older houses near the river swore that sometimes, after midnight, the silence broke not with coyotes, not with dogs barking or a truck passing on the highway, but with voices. Whispers at first, just low enough to make you think it was wind clawing at the tin siding of barns, or the rustle of brittle weeds against the wire fence. But when you really listened, you realized they were words, sometimes pleading, sometimes laughing, sometimes something in between, like the sound of people murmuring in the back pews of a church when the preacher says something they don't want to hear. Caleb Hunt had lived in Llano his whole life. His family's house sat 100 yards off the riverbank, sagging on its foundation like the water had chewed it hollow from beneath. He was 34, unmarried, worked odd jobs fixing tractors, and drank more than he slept. His neighbors were scarce and spread thin. Old couples who kept to themselves, a few scattered ranchers who didn't like to talk after dark. Caleb had never cared much about the voices. He grew up with them, thought they were just stories people passed around to keep kids from sneaking out at night. He had heard them, sure, but he wrote them off as tired imagination, bourbon in his bloodstream, or wind sliding through cracks in the trees. That winter though, they grew louder, sharper. He couldn't shake them anymore. The first time he realized something was wrong was a night in late January when the cold came down so hard that his pipes froze. He wrapped himself in 2 coats and sat near the stove with a lantern lit, around 2 in the morning. Just as he was drifting off, the voices started so clear he could make out every syllable. It was a woman crying. He thought it was his mother's voice, though she had been dead 6 years. She was begging him not to go outside, saying it over and over. "Don't go, Caleb, don't go, please." He sat there, heart thumping, the lantern's flame trembling. He wanted to tell himself he was dreaming, that the bourbon was pulling tricks again. But then the back door rattled. Not a knock, not the wind. Rattled, like someone was standing out there jiggling the knob, trying to get in. Asterisk, he didn't open it. He didn't move at all until the sun scraped its way up over the plains. When he did check the door, frost had clung thick to the knob like it had been gripped by a wet hand that froze there before letting go. Asterisk for the next week. It kept happening, not just the woman crying, but men's voices too, some laughing, some whispering in tones too low to make out. Sometimes it was his father's voice, sometimes old friends long dead, sometimes strangers he swore he'd never met. Every night, always after 2, and always pulling him toward the river. Asterisk by February, he started seeing people along the bank. At least, he thought they were people. They never moved right, never quite solid, just shapes in the fog that clung to the cold water, hunched and shifting, sometimes with faces, sometimes without. They were always waiting there when the voices started, and the voices always led him closer to them. Asterisk one night, he finally followed. He told himself he'd had enough, that if he just went down and looked, he'd see it was nothing but his head playing games. He carried his lantern and a shotgun, though neither made him feel safe. The closer he walked, the louder the voices grew. They weren't whispers anymore. They were screaming, dozens of voices layered on top of each other, like a crowd pressed against a locked door. Some yelled his name, some cursed him, some begged him to hurry. He reached the edge of the bank, fog thick as wool around him, and the river moved sluggish under a skin of ice. And then he saw her, a girl, maybe 19, barefoot, wearing a soaked nightgown that clung to her skin. Her hair draped across her face, dripping water onto the frozen ground. She was standing halfway out of the river like she'd just walked up from the depths. Her mouth opened, and when she spoke, it wasn't her voice. It was his mother's again. "Caleb, it's cold down here. Help me." Asterisk, he stumbled back, the lantern nearly slipping from his hand. He wanted to run, to put as much distance between himself and that river as possible, but he couldn't move. His body locked up like the cold had routed him in place. The girl stepped forward, bare feet crunching ice, and with each step her face changed. His mother, his sister, old friends, men he didn't know. Faces sliding over each other like masks being swapped in and out. The voices all screamed at once, so loud he clapped his hands to his ears. But it didn't stop the sound inside his head. Asterisk, the last thing he remembered was the gurno. The thing grabbing his wrist with a hand that felt like rotted wood. She pulled, and the ground under his feet gave way. Asterisk, they found Caleb 3 days later, or at least, what was left of him. Sheriff Darnell said he must have fallen through thin ice, though no one could explain why he was 3 miles downstream with his chest torn open and his jaw dislocated. They buried what they could in a pine box. Asterisk, and now, people say his voice is among the others. When the wind dies down, when the clock ticks past 2, and the night grows heavy, you can hear him, calling out from the riverbank. Asking for help.
Story 4. When Mason spoke. Asterisk, it was the summer of 1998 when the town of Mason, Texas, started hearing the voices. At first, no one said much. A few teenagers whispered about it at the Sonic Drive-In. Ranch hands talked about it while leaning on fence posts, and 1 or 2 women mentioned it during church potlucks. Everyone brushed it off as gossip or imagination, but by July, it was happening to almost everyone. The thing was, it only happened at night. Mason was a town that rolled up early. By 10, the square was empty, shops dark, the courthouse lit by a single yellow bulb that hummed like it was about to die. The old stone houses scattered beyond the square leaned in silence, porches sagging, screen doors rattling with the occasional gust of warm wind. Nights there were thick full of crickets, cicadas, and sometimes the far-off wail of a train nobody ever saw. But that summer, sometime between midnight and 3, all of that went quiet. Too quiet. That was when the voices came. No 2 people described them the same way. For some, it was a single whisper just outside the bedroom window, a voice they half recognized but couldn't quite place. For others, it was a full conversation in the living room. Words blurred and impossible to understand but heavy with anger or sorrow. One man swore he heard his dead brother calling his name from the front yard. A young mother said she woke to the sound of her baby crying in the kitchen, though her baby was asleep in the crib beside her. Asterisk, Sheriff Warren figured it was heat madness, the way the summer sun baked roofs until tar peeled and sweat never dried. But he couldn't explain why people across town all started reporting the same thing. The longer you listened, the closer the voices got. At first, they were outside behind the trees, in the alley, across the street. Then, a night or 2 later, they were at the window. Soon after, they were inside. Asterisk, by August, people were leaving their houses in the middle of the night, wandering barefoot into the dark. Old Mrs. Kutz walked straight down the courthouse steps at 2 in the morning, muttering to someone no one else could see. Her son found her the next day in the cemetery, sitting cross-legged in front of her husband's grave, hands raw from clawing at the dirt. Asterisk, more followed. teenagers, farmers, even Sheriff Warren's own deputy, who was last seen walking down the highway in his pajamas. They found his car still idling in the driveway, his shoes neatly placed on the hood, as if he had taken them off for someone waiting. They never found him. The town grew restless. Families boarded up windows, stuffed towels under doors, blasted radios late into the night to drown out the voices. But nothing worked. Once you heard them, you couldn't unhear them. They came every night, clearer, sharper, calling you closer. Some people swore they felt warm breath on their necks. Some said they saw lips moving in the mirrors. And then came the night Mason broke. It was late August, a night so hot even the crickets had given up. Around 2 a.m., every house in town went dark. Power lines silent. Radios dead. The whole square swallowed in black. And from that black came the voices, not whispers, not fragments, but loud, booming, layered one over another until it sounded like the whole earth was speaking at once. People poured from their houses, lanterns shaking, flashlights cutting across the square. Some were crying, some screaming, some clutching their ears as if the sound was tearing them apart from the inside. And in the middle of the courthouse lawn, the grass began to move. At first, it looked like wind, but the night was still. Then it rose, shapes peeling themselves out of the ground, bodies made of soil and roots and dust, faces half-formed but speaking, always speaking. Some were familiar, some were strangers, all of them were hungry. No one talks about what happened next in Mason. The survivors, what few there were, scattered across Texas, swearing never to set foot in that town again. By September, Mason was empty, stores abandoned, cars left in driveways, dinner plates still sitting on tables like everyone had just stepped out for a moment. The courthouse doors hang open, swinging with each gust of wind. If you pass through today, you won't see a soul. But if you're unlucky enough to stop there after midnight, you'll understand. You'll hear them. The voices don't whisper anymore. They shout. And once they know your name, you won't leave. Story 5. The Whispering Mile. Back in the late 70s, there was a stretch of farm road between Abilene and Cross Plains that nobody liked to drive after dark. It wasn't much to look at in the daytime, just a thin strip of cracked asphalt cutting through endless miles of flat, dry pasture. But at night, the road seemed to stretch longer than it should, the fences leaning in, the sky pressing down like a lid. Folks called it County Road 214, but most just called it the Whispering Mile. The story started when a trucker named Lloyd fell asleep at the wheel and ran his rig into the ditch. When deputies found him, his face was pale, his eyes wide open, his knuckles still gripping the steering wheel. They thought it was a heart attack until the coroner reported something stranger. His eardrums were burst clean through, like they'd been shattered from the inside. More accidents followed. Cars swerving off into the brush, a teenage couple found wandering half naked through a field, babbling nonsense, bleeding from their ears, a preacher's wife who pulled over because she thought she heard her children calling from the weeds, though her children were safe in bed miles away. By the time 3 oilfield workers vanished without a trace, the county just stopped paving it. They let the road rot. But the voices never left. In 1981, a man named Carter Blake moved out there. He'd grown up in Abilene, worked at a feed store, never made much of himself. When his father died, he inherited a small house right along County Road 214. Most folks told him to sell it, but Carter was stubborn. He figured the stories were just backwoods superstition, nothing he couldn't handle. At first, things seemed fine. The house was old, sure, with rotting floors and peeling wallpaper, but it had good bones. Carter patched it up, drank his beer on the porch at night, and laughed at the idea of whispers in the dark. But then came September. It started with a woman's voice outside the window, soft, low, like she was asking for help. Carter thought maybe it was a lost traveler, though nobody used that road anymore. He went outside with his flashlight, but the beam fell only on grass and gravel. Nobody there. He chalked it up to imagination. The next night, it was a man's voice, angry, cursing at him through the screen door. Carter sat up with his shotgun across his knees until the sun came up. But again nothing, just empty pasture and a road that seemed to hum under the moonlight. By the third night, the voices weren't just outside, they were in the walls. Carter swore he heard footsteps dragging through the hallway, hushed arguments in the kitchen, a baby crying in the attic. He tore the place apart looking for speakers, radios, anything that could explain it. He found nothing but dust. Sleep became impossible. The voices never stopped. Sometimes they called his name, sometimes they laughed, sometimes they screamed so loud he had to cover his ears until blood trickled down his neck. But worst of all were the familiar voices, the ones he recognized. His dead father, his first girlfriend, the voice of a man he once saw drown in a stock tank years back. One night, desperate, Carter decided to follow them. The voices were all outside, pulling him toward the road. He staggered barefoot across the gravel, eyes wide, flashlight shaking. They grew louder with each step. overlapping dozens, maybe hundreds of voices all speaking at once, begging him to come closer, and then he saw them, asterisk figures, lined up along the ditch. Thin, pale, swaying in the dark, their mouths moved, but the words didn't match the sounds. Carter raised the light and saw their faces half-rotted, half-frozen in pain, eyes black as holes. He dropped the flashlight and ran, but the voices followed him, inside his head now, shouting over each other until he couldn't think. Asterisk the next morning, a rancher found his front door hanging open. Inside, the house was empty. Chair knocked over, beer bottles spilled across the floor. Carter was gone. The sheriff looked for weeks, but they never found a body, just his boots, set neatly by the edge of the road. Asterisk today. County Road 214 is overgrown, mostly hidden by weeds and mesquite, but every so often, someone still takes a wrong turn at night. They say if you roll your window down, you'll hear them. The voices, some begging for help, some screaming, and if you're unlucky, one of them might sound like someone you know. Asterisk. Story 6. The Drowned Voices of Turner Lake. There's a lake out past Huntsville, Texas, that doesn't show up on most maps anymore. Back in the 1940s it was called Turner Lake, a man-made basin meant for irrigation, but the project was abandoned halfway through when the money dried up. The dam was never finished, and the half-formed lake just sat there, filling with rainwater spreading slowly into the woods. Over the years people forgot about it. Pines grew tall around the shore, dirt roads washed away, and by the 70s, only a handful of locals remembered how to get there. Asterisk, but they remembered the voices. Asterisk. The stories always began the same. Someone camping by Turner Lake, someone fishing late at night, someone cutting through the pines when the moon was high. Around midnight, they would hear voices drifting low across the black water. At first they thought it was friends playing tricks or strangers talking from another camp, but when they listened closer, the words seemed wrong, jumbled like a radio caught between stations. And always, the voices came from the lake itself. Asterisk. In 1979, a group of college kids from Sam Houston State went missing out there. 4 of them, last seen with a case of beer and a canoe strapped to the roof of their Chevy when searchers dragged the lake. They found the canoe bobbing half-submerged near the dam. They found the Chevy parked crooked on the shore. They never found the kids. Their parents said the police stopped talking about it too quick, like somebody higher up told them to hush it. Asterisk. By the time the 90s rolled around, Turner Lake was a ghost story told by old men at the barbershop. No one fished there anymore. No one camped. It was a place you didn't talk about. A place you didn't go, especially after dark. Asterisk. But some people don't believe in ghost stories. Asterisk. In 2002, a man named Daniel Reeves moved to Huntsville. He was a school teacher, early 40s, divorced, the kind of man who thought camping alone made him tough and self-reliant. He asked around about Turner Lake when he heard the old stories, and when folks told him not to go, he laughed it off. He said he wanted solitude, a quiet place to think. So one October weekend, he packed his tent, a lantern, and a fishing pole, and drove out to find it. Asterisk. It wasn't easy. The old logging road was more ditch than trail, overgrown with weeds and saplings. His truck scraped branches until paint peeled, but eventually, the trees opened, and there it was, Turner Lake. A wide bowl of still, black water ringed by pines that leaned toward it like eaves. The air was heavy, still, thick with rot. Asterisk. Daniel set up camp near the water's edge. He pitched his tent, lit a fire, and watched the sun bleed away behind the trees. The lake reflected it like a sheet of dark glass, ripples barely stirring even when the wind moved. By 9, the woods had gone silent. No crickets, no frogs, no owls, just silence thick enough to press on his chest. Then came midnight. He was sitting by the fire, half dozing when he heard it, a murmur low, coming from the lake. He looked up frowning, thinking maybe it was a boat, but the lake was empty. The sound grew sharper, words threading through the night air. Asterisk. At first he thought it was laughter, then it shifted, became weeping, then it became something else. Voices layered over each other. Some angry, some pleading, some calling names he didn't recognize. Daniel stood, lantern in hand, and walked to the shore. The voices grew louder. They came from everywhere above the water, beneath it, inside his skull. He could swear he heard his ex-wife calling him, then his father's voice, then the sound of children giggling. He felt pulled, like the voices had a rope around his chest, tugging him closer to the black water. The lantern shook in his hand. Then he saw them, shapes in the lake, just beneath the surface. Pale, bloated faces rising slowly, mouths moving though no air passed through them. Eyes open, clouded, fixed on him. Their voices grew clearer as they surfaced, bubbling through the black water. Daniel stumbled back, tripping on roots, but he couldn't look away. Asterisk. A hand broke the surface. Long white fingers, swollen like they'd been soaking too long. It reached toward the shore, toward him. Behind it, more hands. Dozens, all clawing, grasping, pulling themselves up, but they didn't make it. They sank back into the black water, voices still screaming, faces still mouthing words he couldn't understand. Asterisk. Daniel fled into the woods. He left his tent, his gear, even the fire still smoldering. He didn't stop running until the road spat him out near the highway. By the time he got home, the voices were still with him inside his head now, whispering in the quiet. He barely slept. He barely ate. A week later, his neighbor found him dead in his recliner, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream. His ears bled onto his shirt. People said the lake followed him home, that once you hear the voices, they don't let go. They stay with you, day and night, pulling you closer, until eventually you go back. The funny thing is, after Daniel died, some kids tried to find Turner Lake again. They drove down the logging road, GPS in hand, but all they found were trees. The path ended, no water, no clearing, no trace a lake had ever been there. But late at night, if you drive those back roads near Huntsville and roll your window down, you might hear something, a low murmur, a jumble of voices just beneath the edge of hearing, and if you listen long enough, you'll hear them calling your name. Story 7. The Night Murmurs of San Saba. The town of San Saba sits out in the hill country, a quiet little place with pecan orchards, dusty roads, and limestone buildings that look older than they ought to. People there live simple, quiet lives, raising cattle, running diners, selling feed and seed to folks who come in from the ranches. Nothing much happens in San Saba, but if you talk to the old-timers, the ones who've lived through more seasons than they can count, they'll tell you there was a time when people didn't sleep easy there, a time when the town went still after sundown, doors bolted, curtains drawn tight, because of the voices. They called it the Night Murmurs. It started in 1965, when a family named Hollister moved into a big limestone house on the edge of town. The place had been empty for years, standing crooked near a field of wild pecans. Nobody had wanted it. Something about the land not feeling right. Something about the way animals refused to go near the foundation. But the Hollisters were outsiders, from Houston, and they didn't know better. The first few weeks, things seemed fine. The father, Gerald, worked at the bank. His wife kept the house. They had 3 kids, all under 12. But by the second month, neighbors started hearing strange things at night. Voices carrying through the fields, long after midnight, too far to be from the house, too close to be echoes. The Hollisters didn't say much at first. But then one Sunday, the mother came into church, pale and shaking. She told the congregation she'd been waking every night at 2 a.m. to the sound of her children talking in the hallway. Only when she got up, the children were asleep in their beds, and the hallway was empty. The voices didn't stop there. The father said he heard his own name whispered from the pecan trees outside. The children claimed something called them from the cellar, though the house had no cellar, just a trapdoor in the floor that led to a shallow crawl space. Soon, neighbors passing by the house swore they could hear whole conversations spilling out of the windows at night, like a dinner party in full swing. But the house was dark, and no one was awake. By fall, the Hollisters were unraveling. The children refused to sleep, too afraid of the whispers that came when the lights went out. The mother grew thin, eyes sunken, muttering about people in the walls. Gerald started drinking, staying out late, avoiding the house until he couldn't anymore. Then one October night, the voices grew louder than ever. Neighbors said it sounded like a crowd, dozens of people shouting, chanting, crying, their words tumbling over each other until no one could make sense of it. Some swore they saw lights in the fields, pale blue flames bobbing between the pecan trees. One man claimed he saw figures at the Hollister windows, dozens of faces pressed against the glass, mouths opening and closing in unison. The next morning, the Hollisters were gone. The house was silent. The beds were made. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, plates and cups neatly arranged, toast half buttered on the counter, but no one was inside. No sign of struggle, no footprints leaving the property, just absence. The sheriff searched for weeks, combing the fields, dragging the river, questioning everyone. Nothing. It was as if the Hollisters had been swallowed whole. After that, no one would live in the limestone house. It sat empty, windows broken, porch sagging, until vines crawled up the walls and the roof caved in. Kids dared each other to go inside, but even the boldest never stayed past dark. They said the voices never stopped. If you stood in the hallway at midnight, you could hear the Hollister children calling from their rooms, their small voices threading through the air. If you pressed your ear to the crawl space, you'd hear whispers from below, hundreds of them, layered, hissing secrets no one could understand. But the worst was out in the fields. People who lived nearby said that on still nights, when the air was heavy and the crickets went silent, the voices rose from the pecan orchard like steam, sometimes laughing, sometimes sobbing, sometimes chanting in languages no one knew, and if you lingered too long, the voices began to use your name. They begged you to come closer, to join them. Over the years, others vanished. A drifter camping by the orchard, a pair of hunters who thought they'd use the old house as shelter, a teenage girl last seen sneaking out after midnight, heading toward the fields. None of them were found. By the 1980s, people stopped even saying the Hollister name. The house was swallowed by trees, the road to it grown over, until most newcomers didn't even know it was there. But the locals remembered. They always remembered asterisk, and some nights, when the moon was thin and the air was still, they swore you could still hear it. The murmuring, low at first, then rising, spilling across the fields, threading through the town until it brushed against every window, every locked door. Asterisk voices, countless voices, all speaking at once. Asterisk, and if you're unlucky enough to hear your own name among them, don't answer, don't even look outside, because once they know you're listening, once they know you've heard them, they don't stop. They'll follow you, into your dreams, into your house, into your skin. Asterisk. Story 8. The Voices in the Walls. Asterisk. It started as a whisper. Asterisk. Megan had lived in the house on Willow Creek Road for 3 months when she first heard it. At first, she thought it was just the wind pushing through the old cracks of the 2-story farmhouse, or maybe the neighbors' voices carrying across the quiet fields. But the nearest neighbor was nearly a mile away, and the whisper was too distinct, too close, almost as if it was inside the walls. Asterisk. She was in the upstairs hallway that first night, carrying laundry, when the voice came. Asterisk. Megan. Asterisk. She froze. The basket tipped slightly in her arms, socks spilling onto the floor. Her breath caught in her throat. It was faint, soft, almost gentle, but it was her name. Asterisk. She stood there, straining her ears. The walls seemed to throb with silence afterward, as if swallowing the sound whole. When she finally convinced herself she'd imagined it, she picked up the socks, carried on, and forced herself not to think about it. But the voices didn't stop every night. Around the same hour, midnight, the house seemed to wake. The whispering began faintly at first, coming from inside the walls, behind the plaster, in the vents, in the crawl spaces. Sometimes it was her name. Other times it was fragmented sentences. Asterisk. He's watching. Asterisk. Don't go down there. Asterisk. Please, help us. Asterisk. The house was old, built in 1893. It had the kind of sagging beams and uneven floors that creaked even when no one walked on them. Megan had thought she was ready for the isolation when she bought it, desperate to get away from the noise of the city. But she hadn't expected this. Asterisk. One night, she pressed her ear against the wall in her bedroom, trying to locate the source. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear over it. But then, there it was again. Asterisk. We never left. Her skin crawled. The voices grew bolder as the weeks passed. Sometimes multiple voices spoke at once, overlapping in a strange chorus of hushed tones. Men, women, children. It was like the walls held an audience that never stopped murmuring. Asterisk. Megan started sleeping with the TV on, leaving the lights burning in every room. But the voices always found her, always at night, always when the world outside was silent. And then the voices began asking her questions. Why are you here? Asterisk. Do you hear us? Asterisk. Will you stay? Asterisk. She told herself she was going crazy. Maybe the isolation was getting to her. Maybe it was stress or lack of sleep. But the voices didn't feel like they were inside her head. They felt like they belonged to something real, something trapped. Asterisk. One night, unable to take it anymore, Megan called her best friend Hannah and begged her to come stay over. Asterisk. I swear, Han, you'll hear it too, Megan said, pacing the kitchen with the phone pressed tight to her ear. It's not in my head, it's in the walls. They talk to me every single night. Asterisk. Hannah laughed nervously, but agreed. Asterisk. That night, they stayed up together, sitting in the living room with mugs of coffee, the silence stretching like elastic as the clock ticked past midnight. Megan's palms were damp, her chest tight. And then, it came. Who is with you? Asterisk. The voice was low, sliding from inside the wall directly behind the couch. Hannah's face drained of color. Asterisk. Holy meek. I heard that. Asterisk. More whispers followed, overlapping. Urgent. Asterisk. Leave her. Asterisk. She doesn't belong. Asterisk. It's ours. Asterisk. The walls seemed to tremble with their insistence. Hannah clutched Megan's arms so hard her nails dug in. They didn't sleep that night. In the morning, Hannah begged Megan to leave the house, to sell it, to burn it to the ground if she had to. But Megan refused. Something about the voices, it was as if they were trying to tell her something, warn her. Asterisk. That evening, driven by desperation, she went into the basement with a flashlight. The air down there was damp, heavy, thick with mildew. She swept the light across the stone foundation, the exposed beams, the ancient furnace. That's when she saw an area of the wall where the cement looked newer, patched over. Asterisk. Her heart hammered as she stepped closer. She pressed her hand against the cold stone. The whispers surged instantly, dozens of voices hissing at once. Asterisk. Don't open it. Asterisk. They're still inside. Asterisk. Don't let him out. Asterisk. Don't let him out. Asterisk. Her stomach flipped. With trembling hands, she grabbed a rusted old hammer from the tool shelf and began striking the patched section. The sound of metal against stone echoed violently in the basement, dust raining down. Asterisk. And then, with a sickening crack, the cement gave way. Behind it was a small cavity in the wall, and inside the cavity were bones. Asterisk. Dozens of them. Small, fragile, unmistakably human bones. Asterisk. The flashlight beam trembled in Megan's shaking hand. Her throat closed as the voices wailed in unison, filling the basement with a deafening shriek. Asterisk. And then, beneath the bones, something moved. Something that hadn't turned to dust. Something that was still alive. Asterisk.